This is me. I am Jewish. This is my bar mitzvah when I became a real man. This is me in Israel. Naturally, like a good American Jew, I was raised with a strong Zionist foundation. The people around me constantly told me that this right here is our homeland, and that it was our job to protect it from those who wish to destroy us. With the conflict that's been going on recently, and as a Jewish person, it's impossible to sit on the sideline as everything unfolds. Unfortunately, I think the media, both mainstream and social, has done a really poor job characterizing this conflict. Almost all of the discourse on both sides has been about war tactics. It's almost all Israel is doing this terrible thing or Hamas is doing that terrible thing. This kind of discourse has its place, but it's also very unhelpful and misleading for those who are not steeped in this conflict. Today, we're going to take a step back and try to understand what all of this fighting is about in the first place. Just a quick heads up, if you're Israeli, this video is not intended for you. I mean, obviously you're free to listen, do whatever you want to do. Just know that for reasons I'll explain later, Israelis are not really the intended audience. For this video, at least. Okay, on to the video. The Zionist story goes as follows. Long ago, the Jews lived in the land of Judea. We built kingdoms, communities, and had a thriving civilization. Then, in several iterations, the Romans came along and violently evicted us from our homeland. The Jews, having nowhere to go, scattered all around the world, facing persecution wherever we went. After centuries of said persecution, we decided to finally return to our rightful homeland, and in 1948 founded the State of Israel. No longer would we face expulsion, oppression, or genocide, as we finally had a place where we were safe to be ourselves. Hearing this story my entire childhood, I was, of course, very sympathetic to the Zionist cause. As a kid, I didn't even understand how anybody could be against the righteous reclaiming of our land. It's very easy to see how a narrative like this could conjure up a very strong sense of Jewish ethno-nationalism, and honestly, I don't blame people for getting swept up. It took me many years and a lot of internal struggle to even give the other side a serious listen. If you find yourself in a similar situation, I don't blame you. All I ask is that you give it a try. The key to understanding the Palestinian struggle is understanding Zionism as settler colonialism. Let's start by defining our terms. Zionism, as defined by the Webster Dictionary, is an international movement originally for the establishment of a Jewish national community in Palestine and later for the support of modern Israel. Put simply, the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine was the original goal of Zionism. If you're a little bit confused about the geography, I'll explain real quick. This region of land before 1948 was universally referred to as Palestine. If you're just listening and can't see my map, I'm talking about roughly the entire southern Levant bordering the Mediterranean Sea. This land was called Palestine, including by Zionist leaders. In Jewish religious scripture, this region is sometimes referred to as the Land of Israel or Canaan. But the truth is that in any non-religious geopolitical context, everyone called it Palestine, including Jewish people. Of course, there were two major hurdles for those who wished to transform Palestine into a Jewish state. Number one, the vast majority of the population in Palestine was not Jewish, being over 90% Muslim. And number two, the vast majority of the world's Jewish people lived outside of Palestine, mostly in Europe. Of course, in order to be a homeland for the Jews, Palestine needed to have a strong Jewish majority. So some Jews in Europe came up with a solution. Let's band together and colonize Palestine. Settler colonialism, as defined by the Oxford Dictionary, is a type of colonialism in which the indigenous peoples of a colonized region are displaced by settlers who permanently form a society there. Famous examples of settler colonialist countries include the United States, Canada, Australia, apartheid South Africa, and of course, Israel. Whether we like it or not, the political movement for Jewish people to migrate to Palestine and establish an ethno-state for ourselves without the consent of the present population is textbook settler colonialism. But don't take my word for it. Take it from Zionist founding father Ze'ev Jabotinsky. Zionism is a colonizing adventure. Or let's ask Zionist founding father Menachem Usishkin. What we can demand today is that all Transjordan be included in the land of Israel on condition that it would be made available for Jewish colonization. Or let's ask the literal founder of Zionism himself, Theodore Herzl. While asking British colonial leader Cecil Rhodes for help in building the Jewish state, he wrote, "How then do I happen to turn to you, since this is an out-of-the-way matter for you? Because it is something colonial." Zionists also established the Jewish Colonization Association and the Jewish Colonial Trust, which, by the way, is still the biggest bank in Israel today. Zionists came up with these names, not me. The founders of Zionism were loud and proud colonists. Now, what we have to understand is that settler colonialism is not some innocent little endeavor. In fact, it is extremely ugly. Every settler colonist project has entailed the forceful removal of the pre-existing native population. Early Zionists knew this and didn't deny their intentions. Nachman Sirkin, an early Zionist leader, said this: "Palestine, thinly populated, in which the Jews constituted today 10% of the population, must be evacuated for the Jews." Moshe Sharet, another Zionist founding father, said, "When the Jewish state is established, it is very possible that the result will be the transfer of Arabs." Or, going back to Jabotinsky, he said, "Zionist colonization, even the most restricted, must either be terminated or carried out in defiance of the will of the native population." The message is crystal clear. We are here to expel the natives and colonize the land for ourselves. Now, I should mention that during the period of early Zionist settlement, there was much violence on both sides. There were Zionists who massacred Palestinian villages and towns, but there were also Palestinians who brutally massacred Zionist settlements. There is a fundamental difference between the two sides, however. Zionists were fighting to colonize land and establish an explicit ethno-state. Palestinians were fighting against European settlers who openly and proudly planned to expel them and take their land. And yes, I said European because up until the 1950s, Zionism was an exclusively European project. This Vox video right here does a decent job explaining the Nakba, but I also think it was a little misleading. They made it sound like Palestinian extermination was some kind of super secret scheme. Like, shh, don't let anybody find out about the secret plan, Dalit. In reality, the plan to expel native Palestinians for the benefit of Jewish colonists was never a secret. Even before a single Zionist set foot in Palestine, they were loud and transparent about exactly what they planned to do. The historical record shows that mere Jewish presence in Palestine was never the problem for Palestinians. there is abundant evidence that before Zionism, Jews and Muslims in Palestine got along very well. The problem for Palestinians was the establishment of an explicitly Jewish ethno-state, which was openly declared to serve one specific ethnicity. Zionists were moving to Palestine with the explicit aim of expelling indigenous Arabs to make room for their Jewish ethno-state. In all modern history, there has never been a single instance where indigenous people did not fight back against their colonizers. Whether it was the Cherokee of the United States, the Zulu of South Africa, the Aboriginals of Australia, or the Palestinians of Israel. This is the point where most Zionists would retort, "Wait a minute, Jews were here before Palestinians even existed. We, the Jewish people, came from ancient Judea. We are the true indigenous people of this land. How can we be colonizers when we are simply reclaiming our native land?" I think that most Zionists who make the claim that modern Jews are indigenous to Israel don't really take the time to think deeper about what that claim actually means. The thinking usually only goes as deep as, Jews lived here before, we're Jews, this is our homeland. Most Zionists never think to ask, wait a minute, are we actually the same exact people as them? So let's take some time to examine this. Are we present-day Jews the solitary modern incarnations of ancient Judeans, therefore indigenous to the land of Israel? The short answer in both a scientific and a socio-political sense is no, not really. Not in any meaningful sense, at least. Us present-day Jews claiming to be the singular genetic and spiritual descendants of ancient Israelites is not well-founded. Here are the facts. Judaism was founded about 3,000 years ago in the land of Canaan, or as I would dare to call it, ancient Palestine. There is abundant archaeological and historical evidence that this is the case. And yes, the Jewish religion founded 3,000 years ago is more or less the same religion practiced by Jewish people today. But that's about where our connection to this land ends. There's no scientific evidence that modern-day Jews have an especially unique genetic connection to ancient Israelites. While many of us may have South Levantine heritage, hundreds of millions of people all over the world, both Jewish and non-Jewish, have Jewish ancestors from ancient Palestine. Judaism at its core is a religion and a culture, not a perfect, unbroken genetic lineage. All these artifacts dug up in Palestine containing ancient Hebrew script are absolutely part of Jewish history, but they are also part of Palestinian history. Modern-day Jews may feel a spiritual connection to the land, which is totally fine and understandable, but that does not make us in any way the indigenous people of the land. That would be a bit like saying that every Buddhist in the world is indigenous to India because that's where Buddhism began. This is not to mention that another major world religion was also founded in ancient Palestine. Christianity was founded by Jesus of Nazareth, who is believed to have been born in Bethlehem and died in Jerusalem. Culturally, Palestine is just as much the Christian homeland as it is the Jewish homeland. If we Jews have a right to form a Jewish state here on the basis that our religion was founded here, then logically Christians should also have a right to settle here and form a Christian state. If you say, yeah, but Judaism came first, I would reply, no, it did not. Before Judaism, there was Canaanite paganism. Likewise, if people from across the world today were to practice Canaanite paganism, that would also not make them indigenous to Palestine. Practicing the same religion as an ancient population does not give us a special claim to the land they lived in. Now, I can already hear people saying, a Christian state? Christians don't need a state. There are enough Christian countries out there. Christians have not experienced persecution like Jews have. This is where I'd reply, being a persecuted minority does not give us the right to carry out colonialism. Liberia is a small country in West Africa that was colonized in the 1800s by African Americans and Afro-Caribbeans. Like Jews, African Americans were an incredibly persecuted minority, considering that, well, they were literal slaves. Many African Americans, understandably, did not feel safe in the United States and felt that they needed a homeland for themselves. And what better place to create a homeland than the land of their ancestors, West Africa? Over 10,000 African Americans then migrated to Liberia, colonized the land, and formed a state for their own benefit at the expense of the natives. Now, was it okay for African Americans to do this? Absolutely not. Being persecuted does not give you an excuse to persecute others. This was the case for Americo-Liberians, and this remains the case for Jewish Israelis. Even if every last Jew was wiped off the earth until there was only one Jewish man remaining, that would not make it okay for that one Jewish man to commit colonialism. The last big point I want to touch on is the widespread conceptualization of Israel today as an apartheid state. Apartheid is a word that originally came from South Africa to describe a system where white settler colonists forcibly segregated indigenous South Africans. Most black South Africans were forced into ghettos called Bantustans and were barred from returning to the land that their parents and grandparents had lived in. The white colonists who controlled the government claimed all of South Africa as their own land, including the Bantustans, while forcibly keeping black South Africans in walled-off communities and barring them from voting. This is strikingly similar to Israel today, which claims all of this land as their own, yet builds walls around Palestinian communities and doesn't allow them to gain Israeli citizenship or vote in Israeli elections, despite living under Israeli military rule. Of course, the reason Israel won't allow most Palestinians to become Israeli citizens is because if they did, Israel could possibly become a majority Muslim country. Since the very beginning, the existence of a Muslim population in Palestine has been the single greatest obstacle for the project of creating a Jewish state. For Zionists, Muslims are simply an inconvenience. They are to be cast away, oppressed, dehumanized, so long as it means that the state of Israel can maintain a perceived Jewish majority. Some hardcore Zionists are open and blunt, admitting that they wish to forcibly deport millions of Muslim people to surrounding countries. I suspect that others will say it in private, but perhaps tone down their rhetoric in front of the camera. Now onto some smaller points. I want to share with you some of the most common pro-Israel arguments that you're likely to hear and why I think they're problematic. Number 1, Israel has a right to exist. On the surface, this sounds very reasonable and even sympathetic. But if you think about it for more than a few seconds, it's actually a little silly to say that a country has a right to exist. No country has a right to exist. Not the UK, not the USA, not the People's Republic of China, none of them. The USSR, Yugoslavia, Southern Rhodesia, the Confederate States of America, these are all former countries that don't exist anymore, and that's okay. Countries come and go. And if a country's entire identity depends on apartheid and ethnic cleansing in order to maintain its desired demographics, I think it's worth questioning whether that country really ought to exist or not. Number 2, Arabs started all the war and lost. Okay, fair enough. But I want you to think about this. Who started the Haitian slave revolt? Was it the slaves who began attacking their slave owners, or was it the slave owners for, doing slavery? Now, I'm not saying that Palestinians are literal slaves and that Israelis are literal slave owners. However, Palestinians are oppressed people who live under apartheid, and Israelis are the colonizer class who benefits from said apartheid and support it by and large. When you oppress people, they will fight back. If anyone tells you that Arabs or Palestinians started fill-in-the-blank war against Israel, just remember that Zionists started all of this by establishing a settler colonial ethno-state in the first place. Number 3, Palestinians were offered a state many times and rejected it. This notion is based on the assumption that partitioning the land on ethnic lines is some kind of reasonable compromise. Local Palestinians never consented to having colonists migrate to their land from all around the world to form and create a Jewish ethno-state, even in just part of their land. Asking them to give a portion of their land for said settler colony would likely mean mass ethnic cleansing, which turns out was exactly what happened. Not to mention that every partition deal proposed after 1947 has included a demilitarized Palestine, complete with occupying Israeli forces. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't take that deal either. Number 4, Arabs also immigrated to Palestine, not just Jews. Yes, this is true, and also irrelevant. In the 1920s and 1930s, around 300,000 Middle Eastern people immigrated to Palestine to seek job opportunities under the British Mandate. The reason this is irrelevant is because those Middle Eastern immigrants were not moving there as part of an explicit, organized effort to evict the original inhabitants, colonize the land, and form an ethno-state. They were moving there, like I said earlier, to work. When Zionists colonized Palestine, they made no distinction between Arab migrants and native-born Palestinians, hence why they all get lumped together as Palestinians. You don't need to have an ancient connection to the land to be a victim of colonialism. Number 5. Palestine is a fake country. There was never such a thing as Palestinian people. This is false and also not relevant. Palestine, although never an independent state, was a recognized region of the Byzantine Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and later the British Empire. Even the original Zionists called it Palestine. But even if the word Palestine was invented yesterday, it wouldn't change a single thing. All that matters is that these people, whatever you want to call them, are the victims of colonialism and deserve restorative justice. Number 6. The Nakba is fake. There was no ethnic cleansing of Arabs. Look, there are more Arabs in Israel today than there was in 1948. I know it sounds crazy, but there really are millions of people who straight up deny the Nakba. So let's take a look. In 1948, there were over 1.3 million Arabs in Palestine. By 1950, there were less than 200,000. 1.1 million Palestinian Arabs were either killed, expelled, or fled to safety, only to be forbidden from returning to their homes. In 2 years, they went from being 68% of the population to less than 18%. This is ethnic cleansing, period. Since 1950, the few remaining Palestinians have grown their numbers sheerly through high birth rates, alongside their Israeli colonists. So, sorry Israelis, you don't get credit for Arabs having babies. Number 7. Don't you know that Jews were ethnically cleansed from Arab countries? Yes, this is true. And? I've said it many times already, but I'll say it again. Being persecuted does not give us the right to persecute others. Being expelled from our home country does not give us an excuse to go colonize people somewhere else. Number 8. Free Palestine from Hamas. This is something that is frequently said by people who incorrectly believe that they are advocating for Palestinians. Whatever you think about them, Hamas is not fundamentally the problem for Palestinians. Israel had been oppressing Palestinians long before Hamas even existed, and continues to oppress Palestinians today in places where Hamas has no power. Free Palestine is not just an empty phrase. Palestinians are colonial prisoners, and at the end of the day, Israel is the prison guard. Hamas is not the one who built the walls or prevents Palestinians from escaping. Yes, in an ideal world, violent groups like Hamas would not exist. But when you colonize and oppress people for decades with no end in sight, some of them will turn to violent extremism to fight back against their oppressors. Eliminating Hamas, as is Israel's current stated mission, will achieve nothing for Palestinians so long as they continue living under Israeli colonialism. With Hamas gone, some other militant group will take their place. Number 9. If we let Palestinians free, they will murder every Israeli, and then they'll come for every Jew outside of Israel too. Historically, one of the most common fears amongst colonizers and oppressors was the fear of reverse genocide. The idea that if they let their victims go, then those victims will spend the rest of their lives seeking revenge. In the American South, white slave owners constantly feared that if their slaves were freed, they would go on a rampage, murdering every white person they saw. Did this ever manifest? We're lucky enough to live in the future, so we can safely say that the answer is no. Black Americans never went on a mass murder rampage against their white oppressors, even right after being freed from slavery. But Hamas wants to kill all Jews. It says it right there in their charter. First of all, no it doesn't. Hamas removed that clause when they revised their charter in 2017. But even if they still do express broad anti-Jewish hatred, so what? There were a ton of black slaves who despised white people and vowed to take revenge. Anti-white hatred was even core to some black liberation movements, like the Black Panthers and the Nation of Islam. Am I, as a white person, scared that black people are coming for me next? No. The fact is, when you give people basic freedom and dignity and allow them to have a voice in your society, most of them will quickly drop their angry predispositions. Most people are more interested in just living their lives than seeking revenge. But the first step is always giving them their freedom. Number 10. How could you support people who want to behead gays? I'll respond in this way. Everybody deserves basic human rights, even people who hold abhorrent views. There are people with extremely homophobic attitudes in my very home country. Do I think that they should be forced out of their homes, constricted to a small, besieged strip of land, have their freedom restricted, and be denied the right to vote in American elections? Well, maybe. I'm just kidding. No, I don't. Number 11. Why do you pick on Israel, the only Jewish country in the world? For me as a Jewish person, this is very easy. I hate seeing people who I consider my own brethren being so cruel to others. That said, there is violence and oppression all over the world. If you're not Jewish, why should you focus on Israel? Well, if you're American or European, it's because you are directly involved in it, whether you like it or not. Our taxpayer dollars get funneled straight into the Israeli colonial police force, also known as the IDF. I'm not going to stand for this, and I hope you won't either. Number 12. Being against Israel is anti-Semitic. Let me say this very succinctly. The state of Israel does not represent Jews or Judaism, period. Calling anti-Zionism anti-Semitic makes about as much sense as saying that being against ISIS is anti-Muslim. And similar to ISIS, who primarily victimizes fellow Muslims, Zionists are colonizing Palestinians who are fellow Semites. Listen, I know it can feel a little awkward to criticize people you see as marginalized. And Jewish people certainly are marginalized in many countries. However, Jewish Israelis are not marginalized people. In every meaningful way, being Jewish in Israel is equivalent to being white in Europe or the US. Besides, when you see people committing awful crimes, even if they are marginalized, it's important to call them out. If anybody calls you anti-Semitic for being against Israel, the proper response is to laugh in their face. Number 13. You privileged American, you are only able to take this position because you don't see what we see. Here in Israel, we are fighting for our lives. Here is my response to that. Being a criminal is dangerous. Whether you choose to kidnap, rob, or otherwise victimize someone, you are making yourself vulnerable to your victims potentially fighting back. The same principle also applies on a societal level. When you choose to run a country that colonizes and oppresses millions of people, you are making yourself vulnerable to some of your colonial victims fighting back. If it was up to me, you wouldn't be in that position. That is a choice you are making. Number 14. It's complicated. I've heard many times people saying things like, it's complicated, or I don't have the answer. There is only one side who ever says this, the Israelis. You will almost never hear a Palestinian calling the situation complicated or saying that they don't know the answer. That's because for Palestinians, the situation is very simple. Free us immediately. For Israelis, the situation is complicated because they want to maintain their wealthy colonial ethno-state without being too outwardly cruel to their colonial victims. Understand that when an Israeli tells you it's complicated or I don't have the answer, what they're really saying is we are not going to change our behavior in any way. Number 15. You are not thinking critically about this issue. There are two sides to this story. I've been told this maybe once or twice, but I feel like it's worth addressing. It's possible to listen to both sides of an argument, consider their points, and come out strongly in favor of one side. There were two sides in World War II. Both the Allies and the Nazis had a story to tell. After extensively listening to both sides, considering their arguments, and thinking critically, I think I stand with the Allies against the Nazis. I hope you do too. The difference, of course, between World War II and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is that one happened in the past and one is happening right now. It's easy to take sides in a conflict when you already know the outcome. Taking a strong stand in a present conflict takes a little more courage. I sincerely hope, if you're listening, that you'll take my arguments into consideration and decide for yourself who is right in this conflict. Number 16. I just love Israel. This point is mainly directed at my family. I have lots of family members who, like a lot of people, are not super political. To them, Israel is just a fun, happy place, full of amazing culture, history, and, of course, people. Many of them have been to Israel and have fond memories there. If that is how you see Israel, I am not here to argue with you. In fact, I'll even agree with you. Israel is an incredibly unique country and really feels like a warm, special place for us Jews. All I want to say is that for us to have this treasure comes at an enormous human cost. Many millions of people suffer greatly so that we can have the state of Israel. What you do with this information is your choice. So let's say you want to do everything you can to support the Palestinian people. Maybe you've supported Palestine your whole life, or maybe I have convinced you just now, perhaps through this video. Whatever your reason may be, the Palestinian people will gladly take any kind of support they can get. So, how can we as Westerners help to achieve Palestinian liberation? Let's first answer the question, what does Palestinian liberation even look like? I'll tell you what Palestinian liberation does not look like: a two-state solution. The two-state solution is unjust, but more than that, it's simply not practical. Where exactly would the Palestinian state even be? The West Bank? There are over 700,000 Israeli settlers living in the West Bank. Establishing the Palestinian state there would mean either deporting them or declaring them Palestinian citizens. This would not fly. Besides, even if this somehow magically worked, the West Bank is a tiny landlocked area that does not have enough basic resources to sustain its own population. This is not to mention that millions of Palestinians long to return to their homes in Haifa, Jaffa, and Al-Quds, all of which lie outside of the West Bank. A free Palestine means a unified Palestine. A one-state solution, if you will. A secular state that does not declare itself to be for any specific ethnic group. What exactly would this state look like? If I were to guess, it would probably be what we will call a binational state. The first of its kind, really. Jews will probably still call themselves Israelis, and Muslims will probably call themselves Palestinians. At the same time, they would share all the land, all the roads, all the resources, and most importantly, all vote in the same government. Is it going to be peaches and roses and people singing Kumbaya? Hell no. There will be struggle and there will be strife. There will perhaps even be some violence in the streets for a short period of time. And I'm just going to say it bluntly, life will be a teeny bit harder for Israelis. Just like life now is a teeny bit harder for white South Africans than it was during apartheid. And you know what? That's a good thing. Israelis should be happy to give up their colonial privilege so that their Palestinian neighbors can have basic human rights. So, how do we work toward this goal? First, let's talk about what not to do. I suggest avoiding arguing directly with Israelis. Israelis have absolutely no motivation to fundamentally change what they are doing. As with any colonial class, Israelis stand to lose quite a bit of privilege. To them, the preservation of their ethno-state is their utmost priority. Besides, even if you could magically convince some Israelis to support the abolition of their own regime, it's simply not the most effective way to advocate for Palestine. So then, what is? To answer this question, we have to first understand Israel's role in geopolitics. Israel essentially serves as a Western colonial outpost in the Middle East. A strong ally for Western imperial powers in a region full of potential geopolitical rivals. And they are only guaranteed power by virtue of massive financial subsidization from the West. Every single year since 1976, the United States alone has given Israel at least $3 billion in military aid, often much more. This multi-decades-long funding, combined with a very generous trade policy, compounds and bolsters the Israeli economy, allowing their military budget to swell to over $20 billion, which they then use to buy weapons from American arms manufacturers. I'm not saying that Israel would starve without us. To the contrary, Israel has lots of great farmland and a hell of a tourism industry. They are more than capable of maintaining an economy that could feed their population of 15 million. But do they have enough resources on their own to maintain their colonial army with its massive air force, submarines, and nuclear weapons? Hell no. Not even close. Put simply, Israel behaves the way it does because we Westerners pay for it. And as such, that means that we also have the power to end their brutality if we stop paying for it. Withholding financial support to Israel would essentially put a countdown timer on Israel's oppression of Palestinians. Without Western support, Israel will immediately be forced to the negotiating table to work out some kind of truce with the Palestinian people. I know this sounds really strange, but the best way to advocate for Palestine is to convince Americans to stop funding the Israeli oppression regime. Right now, things are looking bleak for Palestinians. The Israeli regime has overwhelming bipartisan support from the United States, as well as broad support from wealthy European governments. With the politicians currently in power, there is no indication that the West will stop funding Israeli colonialism. We have to remember, though, politics takes time. The American civil rights movement took decades to materialize. But once public opinion finally turned against legal segregation, the government was forced to act. When the public turns against Israel, the politicians will follow suit. We're already starting to see this in some select Western countries, like Ireland, for example. Our job right now as Palestine advocates is to turn public opinion against the state of Israel. So, how do we do that? Number 1, be loud and proud about your support for Palestine. Make a stink about it. Let people know how you really feel. Go to a protest. Make a social media post. Call your representative. If you're confident about what you believe in, some people will hop on the bandwagon. Number 2, try to convince Americans by emphasizing how funding Israel is bad for America. Here is the unfortunate truth. Many Americans won't be convinced by starving Palestinian children alone. This is not because Americans are inherently worse than other people, just that humans have a biological drive to care for our own in-group rather than people we see as outsiders. Sure, funding Israel might provide us some mild geostrategic advantage in the Middle East. But that only benefits you if you're a wealthy oil company or an arms manufacturer. Did you know that there are over 30 million American schoolchildren who owe a collective $262 million in lunch debt? Instead of sending $3 billion to Israel, we could wipe out student lunch debt and still have $2.7 billion left over to pay for roads, schools, housing, and much more. As an American, I want to see my taxpayer dollars being used to help my neighbors, not funding an oppressive colonial ethno-state in the Middle East. I hope you are with me.